The words hit me like a physical blow. "We're cutting ties with you, Sarah." My Uncle David's voice was cold, emotionless. Around the dining table, my aunt and cousins avoided my eyes, suddenly fascinated by their half-eaten lasagna. Only my uncle stared directly at me, his face set in that stubborn expression I knew too well. The same expression he wore when he fired employees or turned down vendors at the family hardware store. I gripped my napkin under the table, feeling the fabric twist between my fingers. Just yesterday, I'd signed the preliminary paperwork to buy Harmon's hardware, the failing business my grandfather had built and my uncle had nearly destroyed. The business I'd grown up in, sweeping floors after school and learning to mix paint on weekends. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The paperwork is already with the lawyers." Uncle David's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. "Well, you'll need to tell them there's been a change of plans. We've had a better offer." The lasagna turned to cement in my stomach. 6 months of negotiations. My life savings and a loan that had required 3 separate bank meetings to secure. All gone with a single sentence delivered between bites of my Aunt Linda's famous garlic bread. "A better offer." I repeated. "From who?" "Mitchell Developments." My cousin Jason finally spoke, not meeting my eyes. "They want the building." "The location?" Of course they did. Downtown had gentrified rapidly in the past 2 years. What once had been a practical location for a hardware store had become prime real estate. Mitchell wanted to turn it into another overpriced coffee shop or boutique fitness studio, no doubt. "You're selling to developers?" My voice rose. "After I spent 6 months working on a business plan to save the store? After Grandpa specifically said, 'Your grandfather is gone, Sarah.'" Uncle David cut me off. And with all due respect to his memory, the man wasn't exactly a financial genius toward the end. "The store hasn't turned a profit in years. Because you stopped investing in inventory. Because you cut the staff so thin that customers wait 20 minutes for help." The words burst out before I could stop them. "I showed you my plan. New inventory system, expanded contract services, weekend DIY workshops." "Girl stuff," David interrupted with a dismissive wave. "People don't come to hardware stores for crafting parties." I felt heat rise in my face. "DIY renovation workshops. For people who want to learn basic home repair, which, by the way, is exactly what people in those new downtown condos need." Linda finally spoke up, her voice gentle as if soothing a child. "Sarah, honey, I know you had your heart set on this, but the Mitchell offer is substantial. Enough to settle the business debts and give everyone a nice cushion." "Everyone except me, you mean?" I looked around the table. "Since I'm being cut out." An uncomfortable silence settled over the dining room. The antique grandfather clock in the corner, another family heirloom, ticked loudly, marking uncomfortable seconds. "You'll find something else," my aunt said finally. "You're young, smart, college-educated. The education I got working nights and weekends to pay for because someone convinced Grandpa not to set up college funds for the grandchildren." I didn't bother hiding the bitterness in my voice. "But sure, I'll just start over at 32, with nothing to show for the last 15 years of working at the store." Jason frowned. "You haven't worked there full-time since college." "No, just every weekend and 3 nights a week while holding down my accounting job to make ends meet," I replied. "But I guess those hours don't count in the family tally." David's expression hardened. "This isn't productive. The decision is made. Mitchell's offer expires at the end of the month, and we're taking it." I looked at the faces around the table, people I'd shared holidays and birthdays with my entire life. My family. The same family that had just ambushed me at dinner rather than having the decency to call before I drove 2 hours to be here. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked quietly. "If I hadn't mentioned the paperwork today?" More silence. My uncle studied his plate. David. My aunt's voice held a warning. He sighed. We were going to call you tomorrow. A laugh escaped me, hollow and humorless. Right. After I'd driven back home. Very brave. Now, wait just a minute, he started, color rising in his face. I've spent 30 years running that store. Running it into the ground, I corrected. Grandpa built a business that supported 3 families. You've turned it into a failing enterprise that can barely pay its own electric bill. Sarah. My aunt's shocked voice cut through the tension. That's enough. I pushed my chair back and stood, legs shaking slightly beneath me. You're right. It is enough. I reached for my purse, slung over the back of my chair. Thank you for dinner, and for making it absolutely clear where I stand with this family. Don't be dramatic, David said. This is business, not personal. I paused at the doorway, turning back to look at him. Grandpa always said the opposite. That business is always personal because it affects people's lives. I guess that's one more thing you forgot once he was gone. The drive home blurred through my tears. 2 hours of replaying the ambush over and over, of thinking about all I'd sacrificed to position myself to buy the store. I'd given up weekends when friends were going out, worked holidays, taken accounting classes to better understand the business side. I'd created the detailed business plan that would have restored Harmon's Hardware to what it once had been, the cornerstone of downtown, the place where everybody knew they could get exactly what they needed along with advice on how to use it. My apartment felt empty when I finally arrived. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch without turning on the lights. The darkness matched my mood as I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the enormous hole that had just opened in my future. My phone buzzed from my purse. Probably my aunt, calling to make sure I'd gotten home safely, while also trying to convince me to be reasonable about the situation. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Sighing, I fished it out. 3 texts from Jason, my cousin. They're not telling you everything. There's more to the Mitchell deal than they're saying. Call me when you can talk privately. I stared at the messages, a small flame of something. Hope? Vindication, flickering to life. I knew my uncle could be stubborn and old-fashioned, but dishonest? That didn't fit with the man who lectured us about checking receipts and counting change. I hit the call button before I could second-guess myself. Jason answered on the first ring. Can you talk? He asked without preamble. I'm alone, I confirmed. What's going on, Jason? He took a deep breath. Dad's in trouble. Financial trouble. Bad investments. A second mortgage on their house that Mom doesn't know about. He needs the Mitchell deal to go through fast. The room seemed to tilt slightly. What kind of trouble? I don't know details. I overheard him on the phone with his investment guy. Something about margin calls and borrowed money. And Mitchell Developments. I prompted. Another pause. Dad knows the owner. They golf together. I think there's something under the table happening with this deal. Something not on the official paperwork. My mind raced. You mean like a kickback? I don't know, Jason said, his voice tight. Maybe. Or maybe Mitchell is helping hide money somehow. All I know is Dad is desperate for this to go through, and he's not acting like himself. I thought about my uncle at dinner, the way he'd avoided my eyes, his uncharacteristic lack of bluster when I'd called him out. David Harmon had many flaws, but he'd always been direct to the point of rudeness. Tonight had been different. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He's your father. Because it's not right, Jason said simply. The store should be yours. Grandpa wanted you to have it. He told me that before he died. My breath caught. He did. Yeah, he said you were the only one who understood what the place was really about. Not just selling hammers and nails, but helping people build things that matter. Jason's voice softened. I didn't say anything before because I thought Dad would honor that eventually. And now I think you need to fight for it, but not with Dad directly. He's backed into a corner and won't budge. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. What exactly am I supposed to do if they've already agreed to Mitchell's offer? Get a lawyer, Jason interrupted. Review Grandpa's will. There might be something there about the store's future that Dad has been ignoring. I can't afford a lengthy legal battle, I said. Not after investing everything in this buyout plan. You might not need one. Jason lowered his voice, though he'd said he was alone. Dad hasn't signed the final paperwork with Mitchell yet. There's a meeting next Thursday, and... He hesitated. And what? I prompted. And I made copies of some documents from Dad's home office. Things I found when I was looking for my birth certificate last month. Emails between Dad and Richard Mitchell. Bank statements. Maybe nothing, but... He trailed off. My heart raced. Jason, if your dad finds out... I know, but Grandpa built that store for all of us. It's our legacy. Dad doesn't get to sell it out from under everyone because he made bad investments. His voice hardened with a resolve I'd rarely heard from my usually easygoing cousin. I'm texting you an address. It's a coffee shop halfway between us. I can meet you there tomorrow morning at 9. I'll bring everything I have. After we hung up, I stood in the dark for a long time. My reflection stared back at me from the window, tired eyes, tense shoulders. Behind that reflection, the city lights twinkled, steady and certain. Unlike everything else in my life at that moment, I thought about my grandfather, his large, calloused hands showing me how to use a drill when I was barely tall enough to see over the counter, his patient voice explaining the difference between types of wood, types of nails, types of paint. Hardware isn't just about the items, Sarah Bear, he'd say, using my childhood nickname. It's about possibilities. Everything someone needs to build or fix or improve is right here in these aisles. The memory straightened my spine. I might have been ambushed tonight, but tomorrow was a new day. And if what Jason suggested was true, if my uncle was making backroom deals and ignoring my grandfather's wishes, then maybe, just maybe, I still had a fighting chance. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. The coffee shop address from Jason, followed by, "Bring your business plan too. Might be useful." I texted back, "I'll be there." Then I walked to my small home office and pulled out the Harmon's hardware file I'd been building for months. Market research, inventory system redesign, plans for community workshops, financial projections, everything I'd need to not just save the store, but make it thrive again. If this was going to be a fight, I intended to be fully armed. The coffee shop was busier than I expected for a Sunday morning. I arrived early, grabbing a corner table that offered some privacy while still allowing me to watch the door. My business plan sat beside me in a leather portfolio, a graduation gift from my grandfather 6 years ago. I was on my second cup of coffee when Jason walked in, scanning the room until he spotted me. He carried a manila envelope that he clutched tightly against his chest. His face looked drawn, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thanks for coming." "Like I had a choice," I replied, then immediately regretted my tone. "Sorry, I'm still processing last night." Jason nodded, placing the envelope on the table between us. "Me too. I almost didn't come. Dad called this morning to ask where I was going." A spike of alarm shot through me. Does he suspect anything? I don't think so. I told him I was meeting a friend from college who's in town. He tapped the envelope, but it made me realize how complicated this is going to get. I reached for the envelope, but Jason kept his hand on it. "Before you look at this," he said quietly, "you need to understand something. If we go down this road, if you use anything in here, it's going to tear the family apart." The weight of his words settled over me. Your dad already did that when he ambushed me at dinner. "Maybe," Jason acknowledged, "but this would be different, more public, uglier." I studied my cousin's face, the familiar Harmon nose and chin, the same blue eyes as my mother, his aunt, who had died when I was just 14. Whatever was in that envelope had him terrified. "Tell me what you found," I said gently. Jason glanced around, then leaned forward. Emails between Dad and Richard Mitchell going back 8 months, long before Dad ever mentioned selling. My stomach tightened. 8 months? But he only told me the store was struggling financially 4 months ago. Exactly. Jason pushed the envelope toward me. And there's more. Bank statements showing large deposits and withdrawals that don't match up with the store's accounts. A draft agreement with Mitchell that includes a consulting fee for Dad after the sale, almost like a kickback, but disguised as legitimate work. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out neatly paper-clipped stacks of papers. Jason had organized everything chronologically, with sticky notes marking key points. As I scanned the documents, the picture became increasingly clear. My uncle hadn't just decided to sell the store on a whim. He'd been planning it for months, while stringing me along about the buyout. He deliberately ran down the inventory, I murmured, looking at order forms that had been cut to bare minimums. Made the business look worse than it was to justify selling. Jason nodded grimly. And look at this. He pointed to a bank statement. These withdrawals here, they match deposits into his personal investment account the same day. He's been taking money from the business. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Theft? Fraud? Simply unethical? All of the above. I know. Jason ran a hand through his hair. I couldn't believe it either. Dad's always been so strict about the business finances. A memory surfaced. My uncle lecturing a teenage clerk who'd been off by $3 at closing. His voice stern. It's not about the amount, it's about the principle. Every penny must be accounted for. I carefully reordered the papers, sliding them back into the envelope. What about Grandpa's will? Have you seen it? Jason shook his head. Dad's the executor. He's the only one who has the full document. We all just got summaries of our parts. But you said Grandpa told you he wanted me to have the store? He did. Multiple times. Mom heard it too. Jason hesitated, but whether he put it in writing. I thought for a moment. Who was his lawyer? Morris Abernathy, old family friend. I nodded, making a mental note of the name. I'll need to talk to him. What are you going to do? Jason asked. I tapped the envelope. First, make copies of all of this. Then contact Mr. Abernathy about the will. I met my cousin's troubled gaze. After that, I think we need to talk to someone who knows business law. These financials. Jason, if your dad has been moving money improperly or making side deals, it's not just family drama. It could be legal trouble. Jason paled slightly but nodded. I figured as much. That's why. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. This is Emma Castillo. She specializes in business law. Handled a contract issue for a friend of mine last year. Said she's good and, more importantly, discreet. I took the card, feeling the weight of what we were setting in motion. Are you sure about this? Once I talked to a lawyer. I'm sure, Jason interrupted, his voice steadier than I had expected. What Dad's doing isn't right. Not to you, not to the business, not to Grandpa's legacy. He swallowed hard. Not to us as a family, even if he can't see that right now. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you. I know how hard this must be. He met my eyes. Try to remember he's still my dad. Whatever happens. I will, I promised. We spent the next hour going through the documents in detail, Jason explaining what each one meant and where he'd found it. By the time we finished our cold coffees, I had a clear picture of what had been happening at Harmon's Hardware, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Not only had David been deliberately undermining the business to justify a sale, but he'd also been using company resources to cover personal financial losses. The arrangement with Mitchell included not just the consulting fee, but also provisions that would allow David to remain involved in whatever new business occupied the space, all while cutting me out completely. "I need to make some calls," I said finally, gathering my things, starting with Mr. Abernathy. Jason nodded, standing up. "I should get back before anyone gets suspicious, especially since Dad's been acting paranoid lately." As we walked to the parking lot, Jason paused beside my car. "Sarah, for what it's worth, I think Grandpa was right. You're the one who should be running the store." He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe in some alternate universe, I'm working there too, learning from you instead of pursuing a finance degree I don't even use." I felt a lump form in my throat. "It's not too late for that universe to exist," I said. "If I can save the store, if we can save it, there's always a place for you." Jason's smile widened slightly. "I'd like that." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. Keep me posted." "I will." As I watched him drive away, I felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my future anymore. It was about Jason's too. About preserving what my grandfather had built. I pulled out my phone and the business card Jason had given me. It was time to call a lawyer. Emma Castillo's office was small but impeccably furnished, with a kind of subtle elegance that spoke of success without needing to broadcast it. The lawyer herself matched her surroundings, professional, composed, and sharply attentive as I laid out the situation. "Let me make sure I understand," she said after I'd finished my explanation. "Your grandfather built this business, your uncle has been running it since his death 7 years ago, and you've been working there consistently throughout this period while also maintaining outside employment." "That's right," I confirmed. "Grandpa trained me specifically on the business side. Uncle David was always more comfortable with the customer-facing aspects." Emma made a note. "And your uncle verbally agreed to sell you the business, allowed you to create a formal business plan, and watched you secure financing, only to renege on this agreement in favor of an outside buyer." "Yes, after months of discussions and preliminary paperwork." "Do you have any of those preliminary documents?" I produced a folder from my bag. Initial term sheets we both signed, emails discussing the transition plan, the formal business proposal he approved 3 months ago. Emma flipped through the papers, her expression carefully neutral. "And these other documents, the ones your cousin provided, suggest your uncle has been engaging in questionable financial practices while deliberately devaluing the business." "That's what they indicate to me, but I'm not a legal expert." She nodded, examining the bank statements. "What exactly do you want to achieve here, Ms. Harmon? Stop the sale to Mitchell? Force your uncle to honor the original agreement with you? Or something else?" I took a deep breath. "I want what my grandfather wanted, for Harmon's Hardware to remain in the family, specifically with me at the helm. I want to revitalize it according to my business plan. And I want to ensure my uncle can't drain any more resources from it." Emma considered this. "Have you spoken with your grandfather's attorney about the will?" "I have an appointment with Morris Abernathy tomorrow morning." "Good. That's a crucial piece." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Based on what you've shown me, you may have grounds for several legal actions, including breach of contract and potentially even a derivative lawsuit regarding your uncle's financial management." She held up a hand before I could respond. "But litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and rarely satisfying, especially when family is involved." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Wait until after you've spoken with Mr. Abernathy about the will. If there are specific provisions regarding the store succession, that gives us leverage." She gathered the papers into a neat stack. "In the meantime, I'll review these documents more thoroughly and prepare some options for how we might proceed." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and trepidation. "When should I contact you after the meeting with Mr. Abernathy?" "Call me immediately," Emma said, handing me her card with her cell number written on the back. "If there's anything in the will that supports your position, we'll want to act quickly. especially with this Mitchell deal pending. As I stood to leave, Emma added, "One more thing, Ms. Harmon. Family business disputes are rarely just about business. Be prepared for this to get personal, regardless of how professionally we approach it." I thought about my uncle's cold eyes across the dinner table. It already has. Morris Abernathy's office felt like stepping back in time. Wood-paneled walls lined with law books, a massive oak desk, and the distinct absence of modern technology beyond a single computer monitor partly obscured by stacks of files. The lawyer himself matched his surroundings, old school, deliberate, and slightly rumpled in a way that suggested he prioritized substance over appearance. "Sarah Harmon," he said warmly, rising to shake my hand. "You look more like your mother every time I see you. Thank you for making time to see me, Mr. Abernathy. Morris, please. I've known you since you were in pigtails." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Now, what's this about Jack's will? I thought everything was settled years ago." I settled into the chair, straightening my spine. I need to understand exactly what Grandpa specified about Harmon's hardware. Morris's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask why this is coming up now?" "Uncle David is selling the store to Mitchell Developments," I explained. "But there's reason to believe that's not what Grandpa wanted. He told several family members, including my cousin Jason, that he intended for me to take over the business eventually." The lawyer leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I see. And David is aware you're here?" "No, and I'd prefer he not find out." Morris sighed heavily. "Sarah, I've known your family for over 40 years. I was there when your grandfather opened that store, attended your parents' wedding, helped your uncle through his divorce. I don't like being caught in the middle of family disputes." "I understand," I said carefully, "but this isn't just a family squabble. It's about honoring my grandfather's wishes for the business he built." Something in my words seemed to resonate with the older man. He was silent for a long moment, then turned to his computer, typing slowly with 2 fingers. "Jack's will was straightforward in many ways," he said as he navigated through his files. "Cash distributions, personal items, the house. But the business—" He squinted at the screen. "Ah, here we are." He turned back to me. The business provisions were more nuanced. Jack left controlling interest in Harmon's hardware to David. Yes, but with specific conditions. He adjusted his reading glasses. Let me find the exact language. My heart raced as Morris scrolled through the document, muttering to himself. Finally, he nodded. "Here it is, Section 12.3. Controlling interest in Harmon's Hardware LLC is bequeathed to my son, David Harmon, to be held in trust for a period not to exceed 10 years, during which time he shall operate the business in accordance with its established principles and with the intention of eventual transition to my granddaughter, Sarah Harmon, should she express interest in assuming ownership. This transition shall commence no later than 5 years after my death, provided Sarah Harmon has demonstrated commitment to the business and acquired the necessary skills, as evidenced by her continued participation in operations and/or relevant education." Morris looked up from the screen. "There's more detail about the transition process, valuation methods, and so forth. But the key point is clear. Jack intended for you to take over, provided you showed commitment and gained appropriate skills." I struggled to process what I was hearing. "So legally, Uncle David doesn't have the right to sell to an outside party without offering me the business first?" "That's my interpretation," Morris confirmed. "And as the attorney who drafted the document, my interpretation carries significant weight." "But it's been 7 years since Grandpa died," I noted. "Why hasn't this transition begun?" Morris looked uncomfortable. "I did remind David of this provision approximately 2 years ago. He assured me that discussions with you were underway." Anger flared in my chest. Discussions only started because I initiated them, and apparently they were never sincere on his part. "I can't speak to David's intentions," Morris said diplomatically. But the will is clear. Jack wanted you to have the opportunity to take over the business, provided you demonstrated commitment and capability. He peered at me over his glasses, which, from what I understand, you have done. I've worked there consistently since I was 17, I confirmed. Nights, weekends, holidays. I completed an accounting degree specifically to help with the business management, and I've developed a comprehensive plan to revitalize the store. Morris nodded. Then it seems to me that David is not adhering to the spirit, or possibly the letter, of your grandfather's wishes. He hesitated. What do you intend to do with this information? Stop the sale to Mitchell, I said without hesitation, and hold Uncle David accountable for his management of the business over the past 7 years. The lawyer's expression grew troubled. That could become messy, Sarah. Very messy. I know. I met his gaze steadily. But Grandpa built that store not just as a business, but as a legacy. He trusted me to carry it forward. I can't just let it be sold off to become another chain coffee shop. Morris was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He unlocked a drawer and withdrew a thick folder labeled Harmon J. Personal. Your grandfather left me something else, he said, returning to his desk. A letter to be given to you, in the event that the succession plan for the hardware store is challenged or circumvented. His words, not mine. My throat tightened as Morris handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. My name was written on it in my grandfather's unmistakable block handwriting. He knew I whispered. He anticipated this might happen. Morris nodded. Jack was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. He understood family dynamics better than most gave him credit for. He gestured to the envelope. Would you like some privacy to read it? I nodded, my hand trembling slightly as I held my grandfather's final message to me. I'll get us some coffee, Morris said tactfully, leaving the room and closing the door behind him. Alone in the quiet office, I carefully broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper felt substantial between my fingers, not just physically, but with the weight of my grandfather's final words. I unfolded it carefully, recognizing the familiar handwriting that had labeled countless inventory sheets and training manuals. My dear Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, then Morris has determined that the succession plan for Harmon's Hardware is in jeopardy. I hoped this letter would never be necessary, but I've lived long enough to understand that people don't always behave as we expect them to, even those closest to us. First, I want you to know that my decision to name you as the future owner of the store was not made lightly or sentimentally. It was made after years of watching you work, learning, and caring about not just the business itself, but what it represents to our community. A hardware store isn't just a place that sells tools. It's a place that helps people build and fix their lives. You understood that instinctively from the time you were tall enough to reach the counter. David has many strengths. He's personable, hardworking, and loyal to family. Qualities I've always admired in my son. But he lacks your vision, Sarah. He sees the store as it is, not as it could be. And I've worried for some time that when faced with challenges, he might choose the easier path rather than the right one. In the legal documents, I've attempted to create a clear path for you to assume ownership. But I know paperwork alone can't force someone to do the right thing if they're determined not to. So I've left you something else, leverage if you need it. In the store office, behind the large inventory catalog on the top shelf, the one nobody ever moves because it's outdated, you'll find a sealed envelope similar to this one. Inside are documents detailing certain financial decisions David made during the 5 years before my death. Decisions I quietly corrected but never confronted him about directly. The information would be damaging to him professionally if made public. I never intended this as blackmail, Sarah. I kept these records as insurance for the store's future, believing I would have time to properly mentor David on better practices. Time, as it turned out, that I didn't have. Use this information judiciously. My hope is that simply knowing it exists will be enough to bring David to the negotiating table in good faith. I don't want to see my son humiliated, but I can't allow him to dismantle what 3 generations of our family have built. Remember that the store has survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the arrival of big box competitors. With your leadership, I believe it can survive whatever challenges lie ahead. The store is your inheritance, Sarah, not just from me, but from all the Harmons who came before. Fight for it if you must, but try first to help David understand why it matters so much. Sometimes people can surprise us with their capacity for growth. All my love and confidence, Grandpa Jack. I read the letter twice more, tears blurring my vision. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather was trying to protect both me and the business he loved, but also in his way his son, my uncle. A gentle knock preceded Morris's return. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising gently from their surfaces. "How are you doing?" he asked quietly, setting 1 mug in front of me. I carefully folded the letter. He knew Uncle David might try something like this. Morris nodded, settling back into his chair. Jack was perceptive, and he'd had concerns about David's business judgment for years. The letter mentions documents, evidence of some kind that my grandfather kept, hidden in the store. Morris's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm aware of their existence, though not their specific contents. Jack indicated they related to some financial improprieties. Similar to what may be happening now, I murmured, thinking of the papers Jason had shown me. Possibly, Morris agreed, though I couldn't say for certain. I took a sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. What happens now, legally speaking? Can I challenge the sale to Mitchell? Based on the will's provisions, yes. Morris leaned forward. Your grandfather created a trust arrangement, not outright ownership. David was to operate the business with the explicit purpose of eventually transitioning it to you. If he's attempting to sell to an outside party without honoring that obligation, we have grounds to intervene. How quickly can we act? The Mitchell deal is supposed to close at the end of the month. Morris picked up his phone. I'll file an injunction today to halt any sale pending review of the trust obligations. That should buy us some time. He paused. Have you considered simply confronting David with what you know? Sometimes direct communication can avoid lengthy legal battles. I thought about my uncle's cold dismissal at the family dinner, his secretive dealings with Mitchell, and the financial improprieties Jason had uncovered. But I also thought about my grandfather's words. Try first to help David understand why it matters so much. I'll try talking to him, I decided, but I want the legal protection in place first. Morris nodded. A reasonable approach. I'll get the paperwork started immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you retrieve whatever is in that envelope at the store. Better to have all available information before confronting David. 2 hours later, I stood in the quiet back office of Harmon's Hardware, balanced on a stepladder. Sunday was the one day the store closed completely, a tradition my grandfather had maintained despite competitors' 7-day schedules. Everyone deserves a day to breathe, he'd always said. I'd use my key to enter through the back, not wanting to alert anyone to my presence. The store felt different, empty, both larger and more intimate somehow. My footsteps had echoed on the worn hardwood floors as I'd made my way past silent aisles of tools, paint, plumbing supplies, and electrical components. Now, I stretched to reach the top shelf where the massive, outdated inventory catalog sat gathering dust. True to my grandfather's letter, behind it was a sealed manila envelope, yellowed with age and secured with string. My hands trembled slightly as I brought it down. Whatever was inside had been important enough for my grandfather to hide, yet delicate enough that he'd hoped it would never need to be used. I sat at the old desk, my grandfather's desk, later my uncle's, and perhaps soon mine, and carefully untied the string. Inside were account statements, invoices, and a handwritten ledger. As I reviewed the documents, the picture became clear. For several years before my grandfather's death, David had been skimming money from the business. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. He'd covered his tracks in the official bookkeeping, but my grandfather, always more savvy than he let on, had kept his own records. More damning were printed emails between David and a man named Thomas Reynolds about redirecting contractor rebates meant for the store into a separate account. The paper trail was meticulous and devastating. Evidence not just of poor business management, but potentially of fraud. I felt sick. This wasn't just about the current situation with Mitchell Developments. This was a pattern of behavior stretching back years. The kind of behavior that could result in criminal charges if made public. Is this what Jason had found hints of in his father's office? A continuation of the same schemes my grandfather had documented? I carefully repacked the envelope. This wasn't leverage, it was a nuclear option. One that could destroy not just the Mitchell deal, but my uncle's reputation, possibly even his freedom. Outside the office window, shadows lengthened across the parking lot. I needed to think carefully about my next steps. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma Castillo, injunction filed. Judge Winslow will review tomorrow morning. Keep me updated on any developments. I texted back a quick acknowledgement, then called Jason. Did you find it? He asked without preamble when he picked up. Yes, it's worse than we thought. I kept my explanation vague, not wanting to get into details over the phone. We need to meet. Dad's been asking questions, Jason said, his voice tense. He wants to know why I've been so interested in the store finances lately. What did you tell him? That I was thinking about my future, maybe getting more involved in the family business. Jason gave a humorless laugh, which isn't even a lie. We need to move quickly, I said. Morris filed an injunction today to stop the sale, but... Wait, an injunction? Jason's voice rose. Sarah, that makes this really public. Dad will know immediately that someone's challenging him. He was going to find out eventually, I pointed out. The Mitchell deal can't go through. It violates Grandpa's will. The lawyer confirmed it today. Silence stretched between us. I need to tell you something, Jason finally said. Something I just found out. My stomach tightened. What is it? Mom called me after you, and I met yesterday. She was upset, really upset. He took a deep breath. Dad's in deeper trouble than I realized. He owes money to some people, the kind you don't want to owe money to. The Mitchell deal isn't just about business. It's about avoiding serious consequences. What are you saying, Jason? I'm saying my father might be desperate enough to do something stupid if this deal falls through. His voice shook slightly. I'm worried about what happens next. I glanced down at the envelope on the desk, evidence of years of financial misconduct. I think we need to talk to your mother. Linda Harmon's house, the house where I'd had countless family dinners, including last night's ambush, looked different somehow as I parked at the curb. The carefully maintained flower beds and freshly painted trim suddenly seemed like a facade, a perfect exterior hiding troubles within. Jason met me at the door, his expression grim. Dad's at the golf club, he said quietly. We've got about 2 hours. Inside, my aunt sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling, untouched before her. She looked older than she had yesterday, her usual perfect posture slumped slightly. Sarah. She nodded at me, her expression a complex mix of emotions. Jason tells me you've been busy today. I sat across from her. I think we all need to be honest with each other about what's happening. Linda's eyes flickered to her son, then back to me. David told me about your little meeting with Morris Abernathy. The lawyer called him. I hadn't expected that. Morris called Uncle David. Of course he did. They've been friends for 40 years. Linda's voice held an edge I rarely heard from her. Did you think he wouldn't? I adjusted my approach. Then Uncle David knows about the injunction. About Grandpa's will. Yes. Linda took a deep breath. And he's not handling it well. Jason sat beside his mother. Tell Sarah what you told me, Mom. About the money problems. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her teacup. David made some investments. Bad ones. With people who don't take losses well. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly fierce. He was trying to make things better for us. For the family. The store hasn't been profitable for years. Because he's been taking money from it, I said as gently as I could. Because he's been deliberately running it down. Her gaze dropped again. You don't understand what it's been like. Trying to maintain our lifestyle, our standing in the community. The pressure he's been under. I understand more than you think, I countered. I have evidence, Aunt Linda. Documents going back years. Grandpa knew what was happening. He kept records. Linda paled. What kind of records? I placed my hand on the bag containing the envelope. Detailed ones. About money being diverted from the business. About contractor kickbacks. About systematic financial mismanagement. Oh, God! She pressed a hand to her mouth. I don't want to use these, I said firmly. I don't want to destroy Uncle David or hurt this family any more than it's already been hurt. But I won't let him sell the store out from under me. It's my inheritance. Grandpa made that clear in his will. The Mitchell deal is his way out, Linda whispered. These people he owes money to, they're not patient. And they're not nice. Who exactly are we talking about? I asked. Linda and Jason exchanged glances. We don't know names, Jason answered. But it's serious. Dad mortgaged the house without telling Mom. Took loans against his life insurance. He's desperate, Sarah. I thought for a moment. What if there was another solution? A way for him to get the money he needs without selling to Mitchell? Linda looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. What do you mean? My business plan for the store. The financing I arranged. It includes buying out Uncle David's interest. Not at the inflated price Mitchell is offering, but at a fair market value. I leaned forward. It would be enough to cover legitimate debts. Maybe not everything, but enough to get these people off his back while he figures out the rest. He won't accept less than the Mitchell offer, Linda said, but uncertainty tinged her voice. He might, I countered, if the alternative is having all of this made public. I touched my bag again, the evidence inside it a silent witness, or having the sale blocked entirely by court order, leaving him with nothing and still in danger. Linda stared at me for a long moment. You do that? Use those records against him. I met her gaze steadily. I don't want to, but I will fight for what's rightfully mine, for what Grandpa wanted. The back door opened suddenly, and we all froze as heavy footsteps crossed the mudroom. David Harmon appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his golf clothes, his face flushed with more than just exercise. Well, he said, his voice dangerously calm. This is cozy. None of us had heard his car. None of us had expected him back so soon. David. Linda started. Don't. He cut her off with a sharp gesture. I already got an earful from Morris about my conniving niece and her legal maneuvers. His eyes fixed on me, cold and hard. You just couldn't let it go, could you? Had to push and push. I stood slowly, keeping the table between us. Not that I feared physical violence from my uncle, but his anger was palpable. Grandpa's will is clear. The store was meant to transition to me. You've known that for 7 years. The will gives me discretion, he snapped. As trustee, I determine when and if you're ready. And you're not. You never will be. That's not true, Jason said quietly. The will says Sarah has demonstrated the necessary commitment and skills. You can't just ignore that because it's inconvenient. David's head swiveled to his son, betrayal flashing across his features. You too? My own son. This isn't about taking sides, I interjected. It's about honoring Grandpa's wishes, about preserving the business he built. The business is failing, David insisted. Has been for years. Mitchell's offer is the only sensible option. It's failing because you've been siphoning money from it, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Because you've been deliberately running down inventory and cutting staff to make it look worse than it is. David's face flushed darker. You don't know what you're talking about. I do. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Grandpa kept records, Uncle David, of everything. The diverted funds, the kickbacks from contractors, all of it. The color drained from his face as quickly as it had appeared. What records? Detailed ones, dating back years before he died. He knew what you were doing. That's impossible. But uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He left them for me to find if you ever tried to prevent me from taking over the store. I placed the envelope on the table between us. I don't want to use these. I don't want to hurt you or this family. But I won't let you sell my inheritance to bail yourself out of whatever trouble you're in. David stared at the envelope, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking older and smaller. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he said finally. The people I owe money to. We know, I interrupted gently. Or at least we know enough. And I'm offering you a solution. I pulled my business plan from my bag and laid it beside the envelope. Let me buy the store, Uncle David, at a fair price, enough to cover your legitimate debts. We'll call it an early implementation of Grandpa's succession plan. Mitchell is offering nearly twice what the business is worth, he countered, but his voice had lost its edge. Because they want the location, not the business, I pointed out. And because you've arranged for a kickback disguised as a consulting fee. I held up a hand as he started to protest. Jason found those documents too. My uncle's eyes darted to his son, who met his gaze steadily. The Mitchell deal won't happen anyway, I continued. The injunction will see to that. So your choices are to work with me or end up with nothing, except perhaps an investigation into years of financial improprieties. Silence filled the kitchen. Linda reached across the table and took her husband's hand. David, please, listen to what Sarah's offering. My financing is already approved, I added. We could close within 2 weeks. Clean, simple legal. You get enough money to address your immediate problems. I get the store that Grandpa always intended for me. And what happens to me? David asked, his voice suddenly tired. After you take over? It wasn't the question I'd expected. Not anger or denial, but uncertainty about his own future. And in that moment, I saw something I'd rarely associated with my confident, sometimes arrogant uncle. Vulnerability. That depends on you, I answered honestly. My business plan includes a role for you if you want it. Customer relations manager. You've always been good with people, with knowing what they need even when they don't know themselves. That's valuable. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Working for my niece. That would be something. Working with your niece, I corrected. And with Jason too, if he's interested. Keeping Harmon's hardware in the family, the way Grandpa wanted. David looked at his son. You'd want that? To work at the store? Jason nodded. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. My finance degree could be useful. And honestly, I've never been happy in corporate work. A family business, David murmured, more to himself than to us. The way it was supposed to be. Linda squeezed his hand. It's a good solution, David. Better than what you've been planning with Mitchell. My uncle was silent for a long moment, staring at the envelope on the table. Finally, he looked up at me. What's in there? Exactly. Evidence that could destroy your reputation, I said simply. Maybe worse. But evidence that will never see the light of day if we can resolve this amicably. He studied my face. Jack taught you well. He did, I agreed. About business, about family, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Something shifted in David's expression, a relaxing of tension, a surrender of sorts. The people I owe money to, they won't be satisfied with what the store is actually worth. How much are we talking about? I asked. He named a figure that made my stomach clench. It was substantial, more than my financing covered, more than the store was legitimately worth. I might be able to help with that too, I said slowly. Not with cash, but with negotiations. My lawyer, Emma Castillo, specializes in dealing with complex financial situations. If these people are as dangerous as you suggest, they'd probably prefer a clean, partial payment to the attention that legal troubles might bring. You'd do that? David asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Help me with them? After everything. Your family, I said simply. Grandpa would want me to help if I could. But in return, I need your full cooperation with the transition. No more secrets, no more side deals. Complete transparency about the store's finances moving forward. David looked at his wife, then his son, then back to me. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something that might have been relief. All right, he said finally. We'll do it your way. For months later, I stood behind the newly refurbished counter of Harmon's Hardware, surveying the transformation. Fresh paint brightened the walls. New, energy-efficient lighting illuminated fully stocked shelves. The outdated cash registers had been replaced with a modern point-of-sale system that tracked inventory in real time. In the expanded contractor services section, Jason was reviewing plans with a local builder, his natural aptitude for numbers making him perfect for the estimating side of the business. And at the main entrance, David greeted customers by name, directing them to exactly what they needed with the easy familiarity that had always been his strength. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. There had been tense moments during the financial negotiations, revelations of even more financial entanglements than we'd initially understood, and the occasional flare-up of David's pride when faced with taking direction from his niece. But we'd worked through each challenge. Emma Castillo had proved invaluable in reaching a settlement with David's creditors, one that required him to sell his vacation property and downsize his primary home, but avoided any legal repercussions. Morris Abernathy had handled the business transfer with his usual meticulous attention to detail, and Linda had surprised everyone by volunteering to manage our new home decor section, revealing a talent for design that had gone unrecognized for years. As for the evidence my grandfather had left behind, it remained sealed in the new safe in my office, a reminder of past mistakes, but not a weight dragging us into the future. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Mrs. Perlman, one of our oldest customers, enter with her walking cane tapping against the hardwood floor. "Sarah Harmon!" she called out, her voice strong despite her 86 years. Just the person I wanted to see. I smiled and came around the counter to greet her. "What can I help you with today, Mrs. Perlman?" "It's my bathroom faucet again. That drip is driving me crazy." She patted my arm with affection. "Your grandfather always knew exactly which washer I needed." "I think I can handle that," I assured her. "But even better, we're starting a new DIY repair workshop next Saturday. Basic plumbing fixes. You could learn to replace it yourself next time." Her eyes widened with interest. "At my age? You think I could learn that?" "Absolutely. My grandfather always said you're never too old to learn something new." She beamed. "Jack was a wise man. He'd be mighty proud of what you've done with this place." From across the store, I caught David watching us, a complex expression on his face, part resignation, part pride. He gave me a small nod before turning back to his customer. Mrs. Perlman followed my gaze. "Your uncle's different these days. More like the young man he used to be before he got so full of himself." I laughed. "He's adjusting. We all are." "Change isn't easy," she agreed, leaning on her cane. "But sometimes it's necessary. Now, about that workshop, do I need to sign up beforehand? As I helped her complete the registration form for our first ever community workshop, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. This was what my grandfather had envisioned for Harmon's Hardware, not just a store that sold tools and supplies, but a place that helped people build and fix their lives, a legacy worth fighting for. The family dinner that night, our first monthly business dinner, held in the small apartment above the store where my grandfather had lived for decades, was different from any Harmon gathering I could remember. There was an ease, a transparency that had been missing for years. David, still adjusting to his new role, but increasingly comfortable with it, raised his glass. "To Harmon's Hardware," he said, "and to Sarah for having the courage to fight for it." Everyone joined the toast. Even my uncle's words felt genuine, free of the resentment I'd feared might linger. As conversation flowed around me, Jason excited about a new contractor account he'd secured, Linda describing her plans for seasonal window displays, David recounting a customer interaction that had gone particularly well. I thought about my grandfather's letter. Sometimes people can surprise us with their capacity for growth. How right he had been, not just about my uncle, but about all of us, about what we could accomplish together when we honored both the past and the future of what our family had built. The store wasn't just saved, it was thriving. And so, against all odds, was our family,